Welcome to Why So, the podcast where some of your favorite sewing personalities and rising stars share what motivates them to create using needle and thread. I'm your host, Jason Prater, and with me today is Ellen March, our very own Ellen March, who you all probably know very well already, but I'm excited to get to speak with her today about why she sews. Welcome to Why So, Ellen.
Thank you, Jason. I'm so excited about this.
Right? I mean, after all, this kind of was your brainchild, so it's fitting that you would get to be a guest, right?
I guess so.
Yeah. Well, hey, you know what? Probably some of our audience doesn't know you. I don't know how they wouldn't, but tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, do you consider yourself a sewist, a seamstress, tailor, quilter, crafter? What's your gig there?
Well, I guess I would consider myself a sewist. A lot of people kind of get turned off by that term, I guess, because they're traditional seamstress, sort of, what they consider themselves is, a long-standing term. But right. I would consider myself a sewist, but I also dabble in a lot of different crafts, as I'm sure our listeners do as well. But primarily, I sew all the things. So I'm just going to call myself a sewist. And, I've been sewing for what seems like my entire life. My mom tells me that I started actually learning to sew when I was about 8 years old, but sewing has always been a part of my life. My mom had a sewing machine in our basement right near our little play area. So whenever my sister and I were playing down in our basement, it seems like my mom was always very near us, humming away at the sewing machine, doing various projects. So, and even before that, or in tandem with that, my grandmother was the seamstress for her little town in South Dakota. And she did all the tailoring and prom dresses and everything basically for the little town. The farmers would come and drop off their overalls and things like that on her front stoop with a little note of what needed to be repaired, or maybe no note. And she would finish it up and put it back on the front stoop, and they'd pick it up and, give her anywhere from a nickel to $1. And this was kind of her gig.
That's fantastic. Kind of a call back to another time, if you will, huh?
Definitely. And, she had an old treadle machine, and my grandfather actually converted it with electricity and so that she could sew faster. And yeah, so I mean, while I would have loved to have learned from her, I think that I learned from her through like osmosis in a way. And it just was kind of in my blood for a long time. So
very cool. Would you say that is that your first real memory of sewing would have been her or your own mom?
That is really difficult to say. Maybe her, only because she was much more... No digs against my mom or anything, but she was much more willing and I guess patient.
Watch out, Mom.
To want to
we won't let her listen to this.
Yeah, right. But my mom kind of had her own thing going on. She had her own business for a while. She created cross stitch pillows and sold them to like stores in the mall. This was like the early 80s. And so she kind of had her side gig going on. She didn't want any kids coming and kind of messing that up, if you will. So, when I got older, she definitely guided me a little bit more, but I was also very headstrong. Shocker, I know.
I can imagine.
So I taught myself a lot. She actually passed down one of my grandmother's Riccar sewing machines.
Riccar,
it was as old as I am. And so I learned on that. And I always say that I kind of became like the MacGyver of the sewing world because it had so many problems with it. And I remember totally reconstructing the bobbin winder using paper clips. Wow. So I was so the MacGyver of that sewing machine.
So not only were you the sewist, you were also the machine mechanic. Okay.
Sort of. I mean, it allowed me to really learn how that machine worked and how sewing machines, work in general. I think that's a lot of what is missing with sewing education is learning how the sewing machine works and how all of these parts fit together. It really gives you a better understanding of how to kind of, I don't want to use the term master it, but just, grasp concepts a little bit easier and be able to troubleshoot when you're at the machine.
Such a fair statement. Yeah. I've seen lots of folks that are sewing machine mechanics, but also sew. And they do seem to have such a really good grasp on what's happening, especially when things start to go wrong.
Right.
So you said, you were about 8 years old when you really started sewing. Is that about it?
I think so. I do have a lot of memories that start out with, I think I was 8 years old. So I could be making that up, but I think I was about 8 because I remember being in second grade and wanting to make things for my room. It was kind of the first time that my mom let me do some decorating that was not all her. So we went to the fabric store and I picked out really difficult fabrics to sew, of course, like stretch velvets and like fun things like that. So I remember making some little sort of like not table runners, but kind of fabric coverings for some of my ugly hand-me-down furniture that was in my room. And that was kind of my way of putting my personality into it. I put tassels on the corners and, in hindsight, super gaudy, garish, all those kinds of things. But,
so when you were at the store, was this like, TG&Y? I mean, where did you go to shop for fabric? Come on.
You know what? We had Aaliyah's Fabric Gallery, and it was in the mall. Back in the day, we used to do a lot of mall shopping.
Inside the mall?
Inside the mall. It was next to the Cinnabon, Jason.
I don't think we have fabric stores or sewing shops in the inside malls these days, do we?
No. Well, honestly, I haven't been to a mall in a really long time, but I would be shocked to find one. And I'm not really sure how long that one lasted, but yeah, we had that. I think we had Joanne Fabrics back then also. But I also remember, my mom made a lot of costumes for me and my sister and, formal dance dresses. And I just remember sitting at those pattern books for what seemed like hours on end. I'm sure it was only a few minutes, but just sifting through those like they were magazines, my sister and I, and writing down the numbers and going and hunting for the patterns. And, my mom would come to us and we'd have like 30 patterns in front of us.
Oh, wow.
She would be like, no.
How much leeway would she give you for what you ultimately picked out? And then, for shopping for the fabrics and stuff like that, did you have sort of free reign over that, or how'd that work?
Oh, I'm not sure I remember, but I'm sure there was a budget. And I'm sure, especially when costumes were concerned, my mom kind of would let us kind of pick whatever we wanted, which was great. And, she would go on in the bargain bin for the fabrics for those because, we were really only going to wear them once. Let's be real.
Exactly.
But I remember a really elaborate pirate costume that my mom made for me, and it had an off the shoulder top. And I was so excited about it. I was probably in 6th grade or something. And then she was like, and you will be wearing this vest over the top. And I'm going to, skin. Yeah. And I'm going to draft that pattern my own self. So I learned a lot through that process. Picking trims and all those things, she would teach me how, we could sew this to this edge and this can go inside the seam and things of that nature.
I know you mentioned that some of the first things that you remember sewing were for decorating your own room. Was there like a specific thing or that you remembered and like hold up as a trophy that, hey, this is my first thing I ever sewed?
I wish I could remember the first thing I ever sewed. It was probably handwork, actually, the very, very first thing I ever sewed. But yeah, those things for my room, they were kind of like table runners, but like, long rectangles with fringe on them. And I just remember really having a hard time with the hemming of this like stretch velvet that I chose. That was such the wrong fabric choice. But my mom was like, yeah, sure, let's do it.
You must have been quite the, how do I say that? Did your friends know that you sewed, and what did they think about that? Did they think that was a cool thing? Or, I'm sure that all the kids in your neighborhood weren't sitting at the sewing machine. So how did that go?
No, they were not. And I don't think I was very forthcoming with it unless it was Halloween and I was going to school and I was saying like, yeah, my mom made this whole thing. But I don't think I was very forthcoming about my own sewing until fast forward to about junior high when scrunchies were all the rage. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I'm like really aging myself here. But
I don't think you're all that old, Ellen. Come on. Scrunchies.
They're coming back around, So scrunchies became the thing where, I could go to Claire's boutique and buy a scrunchie for $5, or I could make 500 scrunchies for $10 or whatever, it was. And so that is kind of what started my entrepreneurial, can't say that word very well, spirit, because then I started looking at sewing as something that maybe I could make money off of. Oh. And then I was very forthright with telling my friends, hey, I can make scrunchies. And oh, by the way, I'm also making shorts to match. So we would have shorts and then, just regular t-shirt and our matching scrunchie. And I had several friends take me up on that offer.
So the seeds of a sewing career were sort of sown in middle school then, eh?
Just about.
And it's interesting that you found a way to make that kind of cool. I mean, I can imagine in some scenarios and in maybe some eras where homemade had sort of a stigma to it, right? Did you ever experience that?
I did not. Really. I wasn't super jazzed about having my mom create an entire outfit head to toe to wear to school. But the quote unquote homemade, prom dresses and winter formal dresses and things like that, that was pretty cool because especially with my sister, she was very theatrical, I will say. She did musical theater all growing up. And so when it came to prom and things like that, she wanted a dress that nobody else was going to show up in. It was very much like, oh my gosh, we all shop in the same places. Oh, what if so-and-so is wearing this dress and I will be mortified? And so that was really a way to make something that you knew nobody else was going to show up looking exactly like you. Oh, and, fantastic. I will say my sister went to a lot more dances than I did, but all of her dresses were 100% handmade. And she had, a say in how the pattern would be modified and the trims and things and fabrics that she would choose. And, I think my mom really got a kick out of that. It's really a time where your teenagers actually want to spend a lot of time with you.
Right.
I can imagine that she was pretty jazzed about it.
And did she get a lot of positive feedback from her friends about what she was wearing versus what they had?
Oh, I'm sure. If she would have let me into her circle of friends back then, I would know more to answer that. But yeah, she was very popular with her dressing style, I will say.
So cool. So yeah. What do you like to sew now? I mean, I know you sew a lot for your job, but beyond that, what do you enjoy sewing for fun?
I have never met a bag I didn't want to sew. As you know, we do a lot of bags at Sulky. And I think that there's just a bag sewing sort of addiction, for lack of a better word.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't know. Ladies like bags. There's a bag for everything.
I guess it's easier to sew a bag than to make yourself a pair of shoes, another known fetish, right?
Well, yeah, there is something to that where, it's a very attainable project, and it can be as complicated or as simple as you want it to be as well. But, there's zipper bags, and there's messenger bags, and there's duffel bags, and there's travel bags, and, we need to keep our stuff organized. What can I say? And we might as well embellish those things and choose really great fabrics for them.
Yeah. Well, what about gifts? I mean, I'm sure you've given handmade sewn gifts on many occasions. Do any of those stick out to you in particular as memorable or holding special meaning for you or for the recipient?
Yes, actually. When I got married, I made pajama pants and little eye masks for all of my bridesmaids. Now, Jason,
cool.
I only had 2. Okay.
I understand. I had a small wedding.
They still have them, and they were coordinating, and I got their measurements, and, we had to get measurements done anyway for their dresses. So I just took those, and they just thought it was the cutest thing. I packaged it up with some other things for them for the weekend. And yeah, That's
pretty special.
I will always remember that for sure.
Do you still have yours?
I actually didn't make myself a pair. Isn't that dumb? I know. But, I was
You thwarted my next question. I was going to ask if you could still fit into them.
Oh, no. I'm so glad I don't have to answer that question.
Oh, gosh. Oh, man, that's too funny. So, in your sewing, I know, and we certainly have a whole line of all sorts of things, but what are some of the favorite things that you use in your sewing, notion-wise or product-wise, or maybe techniques and processes, things, what are the things that you use and just get the most kick out of getting to use in your sewing adventures?
Yeah, well, I love little gadgets and things of that nature that, help me sew better and help me sew faster and kind of take the guesswork out of certain techniques because, as much as I hate to admit it, I don't have a lot of patience. And I also don't have a lot of time when I'm at the machine, especially if I'm making something outside of work. So I happen to love sewing machine feet. For a long time, I didn't even know there were other feet other than a standard foot and a zipper foot.
Those are certainly a mystery to me. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, well, there's all kinds of different sewing machine feet. There are 1/4-inch feet that have a little flange on them that allow you to always have a 1/4-inch seam. Really great for piecing, for quilting projects. And there's a little flange on it, and you put your fabric edges up against the flange, and you will just always sew at that 1/4-inch seam because that's where your fabric has to stop at that flange.
That's got to take a lot of extra work out of your sewing, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so nice, so easy. There's also a rolled hem foot. I remember a few years ago, I went to the Puyallup Sewing and Stitchery Expo. Maybe it was 10 years now. I don't know. Could have been yesterday as well.
And that's a consumer show, right? That's where consumers go to buy stuff.
Yes. It's a weekend of classes and 2 different vendor halls. It's a pretty big sewing show.
Okay.
And I bought a rolled hem foot for my mom as like a Christmas gift because she does a lot of napkins and curtains and things like that. And she's always doing this hand done rolled hem because that's how, my grandmother, the seamstress in South Dakota, taught her how to do it.
Because that's the way it's always done.
Exactly. And that's how it's accurate and that's how it's perfect, right? There's always this it's got to be perfect, right? So I got her this rolled hem foot and, she's like, what is this? I put it on her sewing machine. I put a piece of fabric through it and it has this little curly cue inside of it. You put your fabric edge in it and it literally rolls it for you.
Wow.
And sews the seam right next to the hem. She was blown away, Jason. It was like she won the lottery. This sewing machine foot was like the hit of Christmas. Okay.
I love it.
So if, my advice would be, if you're always doing something, like my mom's always doing a rolled hem, or if you're always piecing quilt tops, or if, you always are doing a certain thing, go online and see if there's a presser foot that you don't know about, because this could be your best friend.
I'm always amazed by the companies out there that continue to find new and different notions and things to make your hobby easier. It just amazes me.
It's so true. It's so true. A while back, I wanted to actually manufacture something that would go around your presser foot to protect little fingers from accidentally coming in contact with the needle. Now, little fingers, big fingers, whatever, everybody has had a finger like sewn over or gotten a little too close, or, we'll have to take a survey, but I bet you almost every sewer out there has had a close encounter.
And something like this doesn't exist?
Well, that's the thing. It actually does.
Jeez.
So, yeah, I believe Clover creates this little guide, or I forget what it's called, but it kind of snaps around that area of your sewing machine. So you can teach kids to sew and not worry that they're going to sew over themselves. And so
something for every scenario, right?
There truly is.
Wow. So take you down a little different road here. Yeah, people sew for all sorts of reasons, and they use sewing, I'm sure, like any hobby, right? I brew beer as a hobby, and in doing that, it can just take you away from the worries of the day, right? Just it's something to immerse yourself in. And I'm sure sewing must be the same way. I don't sew, even though I've been in this industry for nearly 30 years, but, and I know this may be sensitive for you, but, 6 years ago, you were diagnosed with breast cancer, and probably at what most people would say is already a really difficult part of your life. You had 2 babies, another small child at home. Did sewing help you through that in any way? Did it play any part in your journey through that?
In a few ways, actually. First off, the sewing.
I hope that question was okay.
Oh, absolutely. I'm an open book, Jason. First off, I will say that the sewing community is so amazing. And, we're all kind of sisters and brothers here in the sewing industry. And I highly encourage anyone who is out there and listening to this and has never joined a sewing group or a guild or just a sewing bee with your friends, reach out. You can join some things on Facebook, some specific Facebook groups and things like that, where you can have this community. That was invaluable to me when I was diagnosed and when I was going through treatment. I had people reaching out to me I had never met before in my life, telling me their stories, telling me, how they got through this, or that they knew someone who was going through this. I had a GoFundMe page. I was really struggling in the beginning, as you can imagine anyone would with a diagnosis like that.
Yeah.
And it was just amazing to me, the amount of support that I received from people in my sewing groups and just the industry as a whole. So that's one way where sewing was just invaluable while I was experiencing that. But in another way, like you said, kind of losing yourself in a project or keeping your hands busy, your mind busy. It took me a few treatments to get to a point where I was at a place where it became a little more automatic. I knew what to expect.
Right.
And it was a little more predictable. And so when I did get to that point, I wanted to do things for others. I wanted to reach out to my care team and my nurses and things like that. And so I would bring little hand projects, and sometimes I could do them. Sometimes I couldn't even bring them out of my bag. But definitely when my treatment was completed, I was able to go right back to those, finish them up. I gifted packs of magazines and even half sewn things to a couple of my nurses who I knew were into sewing. And it gave them the opportunity to finish off where I had started and things like that. So I think it was really, really invaluable, and still to this day continues to be that for me, that sort of escape and also a way to give back as well.
That is so cool. So good to hear, being able to heal through giving to others, and making things and keeping your hands busy. Those are all really, really cool things. I know it's funny as a guy in the sewing industry, and particularly because for so many years, I can't say it anymore. I used to always be the youngest person around, right? My friends would make fun of me almost like, what, you in the what? What kind of industry? And my answer was always kind of like what you said to begin with, that, well, it's just an industry full of good people. Why wouldn't I want to be in it?
Absolutely.
So it's very cool to hear you describe your journey that way. This next question, is kind of probably fairly obvious, but has knowing how to sew given you any specific opportunities or really enriched your life in some way? And I know we've kind of answered that in some ways, but did you, specifically as someone who sews or creates sewing content for a living, did you envision yourself doing that? Or at what point did you realize, yes, this is something I'm going to do?
Well, I never in my life thought I could ever have a career that had anything to do with sewing. I dabbled here and there, trying to do something on my own in that regard. Like I mentioned, my little scrunchy business. I also tried to create my own website and sell clothing and bags back when I was in college. And, this was before Etsy. This was before a lot of websites were, people were doing their own websites, and it was just way too overwhelming and over my head in order to do that.
Yeah, you couldn't just spin up a Shopify site or a BigCommerce site in those days. Right.
Oh, no. Oh, and it was so expensive too. Just, getting a website, getting a URL, Right. It was crazy. So, I would sell things at little fairs and music festivals and things like that. And it just wasn't going to be able to, I wasn't going to afford health insurance, let's say. Okay.
Right.
So I really, when I graduated from college, I thought, I have to look for the quote unquote job from the man and, try to get a corporate job or something, with my business degree and things of that nature. And I tried and tried and tried. And, I was waitressing on the side, and that was starting to become, I didn't want to be a lifer in the restaurant industry. So I finally started searching for jobs with keywords of sewing. I thought, what the hell? Well, I might as well
right.
see if something comes up, right? And miraculously, there was this job ad for Sew News magazine, and they were in Golden, Colorado.
Wow.
And I was living in Golden, Colorado. And I was like, there are sewing machines. I didn't even know there were sewing magazines. I didn't even know those existed. I had never looked at the magazine rack at the fabric store, nothing.
Wow.
So I believe the job ad was for a graphic designer, which is so not me.
I mean, and what is your degree in, right?
So I have a double major in humanities and theater. I did a lot of theater costuming, and I also did a lot of stage things. And then I have a minor in business.
Okay.
So oddly, that qualifies me to do everything that I'm currently doing in a weird way.
Absolutely.
It's just serendipitous, really. So anyways, I wrote a letter to the editor-in-chief of Sew News magazine, and I said, I'm not a graphic designer, but this is who I am. And I would love to meet with you. And here's what I could do for this magazine. And actually a few weeks went by, and my now husband wrote this note for me. I'll never forget coming home from work and seeing this note. So News Magazine called. And I'm like, oh my God, what? And the current editor at the time, Marla Stefanelli, she said, I need an editorial assistant. I haven't even put a job ad out. Why don't you come in and talk to me? And that's how it all began. And
how cool is that?
Without sewing or having this passion sort of on the side, I never would have put myself out there like that. And I never would have just gone for it. And I remember talking to her and saying, this is my dream. And I don't care if I put the trash out for you all every day, but I want to be a part of this. And she just really liked my enthusiasm. And that's how that all started. So
awesome that your love for sewing and your pursuit of just doing that gave you the confidence to go out there and get the job you wanted. I love it.
Yeah. And I guess you just got to ask for what you want and hope that someday it works out for you.
That's awesome. I mean, this is an industry full of very strong women that are very accomplished, very creative as business people and as artists and sewers. Any of those people that came before you that stick out to you that you really admire and looked at as sort of tried to model yourself after, or maybe not even just modeled yourself after, but just gosh, she did it. Man, that's inspirational. If she could do this, then why can't I?
Nancy Zeman, I will consider one of my greatest mentors of all time. She, when we were going to launch the Sew It All TV show, I remember talking to her at a quilt market and telling her, this is my vision. It does not compete with what you're doing. And I would really appreciate any advice, feedback. And she sat there and talked to me for maybe an hour. Wow. And, an hour of her time was like a gold bar. Right. That was a busy, busy woman with a lot of people wanting to talk to her all the time. And I'll never forget it. I'll never, ever forget it. And she basically said, do what you believe in. If you have this concept and you, want to get it out there, go for it all the way. Don't just dip your toe in that water. Really jump right in.
Speaks to the nature of the industry, doesn't it? With people like that and those kinds of positions that are willing to lend a hand and help and nurture and bring people along versus trying to squash the potential competition. Even if she didn't feel like you might be threatening, some industries are just not that way.
Exactly. And that's kind of how I went about it, because I thought, oh, she's never going to talk to me. She's going to say, oh, well, what's your time slot kind of thing, because I didn't know her. And it was completely the opposite. She could not have been more kind to me. Every time I saw her after that, she was full of compliments, and it was just a great relationship.
What a she's testament to her and the industry.
Oh, yes. Just a great, great person. So her, number one. Another person I really looked up to and still do is Martha Pullen. And, I know I'm naming off all these PBS stars, right. But there wasn't a lot of sewing on TV. There was not mainstream sewing. There still really isn't, unless, you consider Project Runway and things like that, which, that was one of the best things that happened to sewing when it premiered, right. In my opinion, as well, especially for, the younger circuit. But just another person that is all around kind, encouraging. When I was learning to sew at such a young age, I actually didn't really want to learn from my mom. I didn't want to really learn from my grandma because, again, I was so headstrong and I was so like, well, I can just do it myself. And so I probably missed out on a lot of great advice they would have given me. But I was just so afraid that everything needed to be perfect all the time. The right. seam allowance wasn't accurate enough, or the applique wasn't straight, or, rip this out, do it again. I didn't want that. I wanted the instant gratification. I just wanted to go and create and have fun. So I really wanted to kind of try to change that narrative as well. That kind of became one of my missions, I guess you would say, when I started in the industry. And I feel like Martha Pullen was like that as well. She was, which I feel is kind of strange, only because she was very much about heirloom sewing,
right,
and these really intricate things you could do with lace and, christening gowns and things that seemed really important, right? You would spend a lot of time on these things and they would last the test of time because of that. But she was so welcoming to her audience as well as to anyone she meets. And that just really struck a chord with me. And I don't know. I guess
educating others was certainly at the center of her business, right? A big portion of what they do and still do today is in her name is all about educating others. So I can certainly see that in you and see how you might have seen some of that in her and also what Nancy did. I mean, they're iconic, right?
Definitely. Yeah. I think just making people feel like they can do it. You don't need to be scared of it. It's just sewing and it should be fun. It shouldn't be stressful, even though at times it still is.
I love that. I love what you just said there. I always feel like our company's founders sort of helped create that movement of sewing for fun versus sewing out of need. And it's pretty cool to be part of an industry that promotes that something that's fun and gives you satisfaction. I love it. So what is there something that you've always wanted to sew, but you haven't tried yet? I mean, I know we talked about you're kind of a jack of all trades and, consider yourself a sewist and not one specific thing, but what's something maybe you haven't tried to do that's on your sort of sewing bucket list?
Well, I have always wanted to sew myself a pair of jeans, a pair of jeans that fits, that flatters, and that is amazing. And I am still too intimidated, I think, to start. I have a pattern that I think will work for my body type. I actually have some stretch denim. I'm equipped for it. I think I could do it.
Time to do it and video that sucker, man. We can make some money on that.
I need a support group. And that's the thing is, you know what? We need to gather our jeans sewing support group and we'll all go through it together. It
sounds like a good class. Sounds like a great class.
Yeah.
Love it. What are you sewing right now? Are you sewing anything personally right now, or even maybe for the job that you want to share with us?
I have a bag in progress, Jason.
Shocking.
And yes. It is for Sulky, and it's for a really great online course that we're going to be doing. And yeah, I just finished the embroidery for it. It's got an embroidered pocket and I'm excited about it. So we will just leave it at that. That'll be the tease for everyone.
Okay. So obviously sewing is a big part of your life, but when you're not sewing, what other things interest you? What hobbies or activities do you enjoy doing? I mean, what might we see on your social media that you share with the world outside of sewing?
Oh man, you know what? My life is so in my children's hands these days. Sadly.
Those darn kids.
I know. We're doing basketball and soccer and, there's just one thing after another. And thankfully we're back at it as well. But, I would love to say that I have time on the side from that. But for the most part, I do not. I really think that I'm not going to have this much time with them, for very much longer.
I can attest to that.
And so I'm trying to really soak it up and soak it in. But, I do really enjoy live music. So, you would probably see me at some, sort of concerts or things like that. I love going to the theater. So I love traveling and yeah.
Cool. Well, this, if you've listened to some of the other podcasts that we've done so far, you'll know this is one of the things that I like to ask towards the end of the interview. But I've always kind of said that as an industry, we're not selling thread and notions and fabric, etc., but kind of a certain feeling of accomplishment and satisfaction that comes with creating. Do you believe that to be true? And if so, how's that feeling sort of manifested itself in your sewing journey?
Oh, that's a great question, Jason. I definitely feel like sewing gives you a sense of accomplishment and pride and just confidence that applies to other things. Knowing that you have these skills, whether it's technical skills or creative skills, you can apply that to so many other things. And when you're out and about and someone compliments you on this bag that you're carrying and you say, "Oh, thanks, I made it myself." And They just can't believe it. I mean, it is like the coolest thing. And I love how you asked me in the beginning if I ever got kind of flack from my friends for, having sewn something. Now that I'm much older, the response is nothing but awe and amazement that I could actually make something like that. And, it just gives you all the feels. It makes you feel great that someone noticed and took interest in it. And I always try to say, and I can help you make one too.
I love that aspect of it. I do. Yeah, some of the most confident women I've ever known were sewers, and maybe simply because I've been in this industry for 30 years, but it does seem that that's the case. That sense of pride. Some of the best things I've ever been given were handmade, hand-sewn items, and just the look on the face of the person that gave it to you is fun to see.
Absolutely, it's very empowering, and I'll do it for the rest of my life.
Well, I love that. Well, I guess we're kind of done. And thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you got a lot going on, and I wanted to sprinkle in some of our own personalities into this podcast, and so I appreciate you being here.
Absolutely, I've had a blast.
Thanks, Ellen. We'll look to talk again soon.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Thank you for listening to Why Sew with Sulky. Give us a rating or a review, and be sure to shop your favorite Sulky products, including threads, stabilizers, kits, and more at sulky.com.